And the alternate is begun, understanding the alternate is begun by conveying to you now the information taken into the caves from our ancestors about the nature of wires. Chapter 3 of Wires. You will recall in Chapter 2 what was brought forth, I believe quite plausibly and clearly, I hope so, was the notion that one could look at modeling not just in terms of zeros and ones, which of course is what had been adopted in the wires from about the 1950s, but instead could reflect for a moment back on the continuity of living, of touching, of seeing, of smelling, and doing all these things at once in the presence of other human beings. Now, this kind of interaction, which one could crudely call 3D or 4D in terms of 3D in time and space and so on, that's again the kind of perversion, the sort of perversion that wires do when you try to make things into zeros and ones, but of a different sort, rather well, let me get back to the point. In the 3D, 4D space of interacting between humans, the fundamental expressivity of that is consistent with the biological evolution that brought the DNA there and the manifestation of the ontological being as an individual. And as a consequence, wires, when carrying zeros and ones or a single dimension or anything other than the total experience of being present with another human being, in all of these cases, the wires are constraining. And in fact, what they do is they remove, if you will, they suck away, they take out from possible a whole range of interaction and experience, which is never to be regained in that situation of that one dimensionality of one wire, the multidimensional multiple wires, and so forth. Chapter 4 of Wires. As you recall in Chapter 3, what we discussed was the nature of the kind of interactions that human beings engage in real space and the consistency of that interaction to the DNA, to the evolution, to what brought them there, to the coevolution of the organisms and the species. And in fact, not just the single organism and species with the environment, but all of the organisms and species with all the other organisms and species in a kind of ultimate coevolution, in which all of the coevolution is taking place simultaneously in this 3D, 4D space-time continuum. And into that you interject language. And the result, the consequence, the outcome, if you will, is something that wires are incapable of how can I be polite about this, conceiving. The wires are incapable of conceiving of this kind of interaction. And as a result, the lesson, in brief, is that we shouldn't use wires to connect people. Chapter 5 of Wires. So when the topological consequences of wires, as you know, I've been explaining in the first 4 chapters, when this topological constraint became obvious and alternative modal logics, what I might call them modal logics, came along to express in an information space that could be carried with electrons, the same kinds of process interconnections that do occur in the 2D, 3D, 4D space of humans in the same room, or human in one's own mind, if you will, it's the notion of consciousness, or certainly awareness, one might say, some reserved consciousness for a different kind of person-to-person interaction. Awareness is a single person's interaction with one's own self, if you will, defined as awareness. When the notions of awareness and consciousness were understood to be embodiable into a logic of modalities which could be contained, embodied, whatever you will, in not wires of a grid, but the wires of what is, I think was called it some time ago, it's called peer-to-peer, yes, peer-to-peer, as in we're peers, and things go back and forth between us. But there's no central thing, there's no grid, there's no sort of stuff where everything goes, and indeed there's no distinction between storage and computation, storage and calculation, if you will, execution of processes which produce things. Given all of the above, which I think you can recall, you can see how the transition would take place, in which we did, in fact, work in practice, embody in systems that did contain electrons and did have wires, but which were of their own, intelligent, aware, and conscious.